Join Chris and Suzanne Vester today on Faith, Family, Fulfillment as they lead discussions on creating a strong bond and having a loving relationship through Christian values. Guests on the show share insightful stories and ideas to enhance a positive family upbringing and create trust in one another, as well as providing encouraging words of wisdom everyone should hear. And now, here are Chris and Suzanne.
Well, hello and welcome to Faith, Family, and Fulfillment. I am Chris Vester and
I'm Suzanne.
And today we have an amazing guest, Janika Veasley. She is from Pennsylvania. She has a private practice in Pennsylvania. She specializes in couples therapy. I think that's how you put it out there to us, helping individuals and couples find ways to work through issues and just enhance the relationship and develop methods and practices that keep them centered and grounded and on the same page. Is that a real good way of putting it?
Absolutely.
And welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you being here. So, our podcast is called Faith, Family, Fulfillment, and opening up in prayer is something that I feel like needs to be done. So if you don't mind, I'll open us up in prayer.
Sounds good.
Lord, we thank you today. We come to you with humble hearts, open minds, and open ears. And we just really want you to come into space and let the message come from Janika that everyone needs to hear to have massive impact in their life, in their relationship, and help them deal with whatever issues may be there. We thank you for everything. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, how'd you get started? Tell us your story.
Okay. When I was in undergrad, I was studying communications and I was initially thinking public relations. And then I switched my focus to interpersonal to study how men and women communicate. And from there, it just kind of blossomed a little bit because once I graduated, everything was sales. I'm not a good salesperson at all. It's a skill that I do not have. And so when taking that time off, my pastor actually suggested, well, why don't you look at couples therapy since you want to work with couples? I was like, okay. And so I applied to a couple schools and actually went to Drexel and majored in marriage and family therapy. And so after about 2 years, got my master's and decided to work with families. And I've done, mobile therapy. I've worked in foster care. My last job was actually in corrections. And throughout all of this, I had a private practice part-time. And so maybe the past 4 years, I went full-time in my practice. And then I also got my license in Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Gotcha. So you gave a little bit of that. What was the motivation? You said family counseling. What was the motivation to start working in family counseling for you?
When I was in high school, I actually worked part-time at a law office. My mom's a paralegal. And so there's a couple different attorneys there. And the one I worked for did a lot of matrimonial law. And just watching how messy it got. And it just, to think that these are people who at one point loved each other and wanted a family and build a future. And then to watch it all kind of, I don't even want to say fall apart, but it got very heated and contentious and messy. And I wanted to help people not feel that anymore.
So you had a lot of experience in a very broad range of environments. So if you don't mind, share some of the things that you feel incredibly accomplished about in each one of those areas. Where do you feel like you shine the most?
Where I shine the most, I think I would probably have to say in corrections. You have to have a bit of a thick skin, but to be able to sit down with people while they're going through a legal process and may or may not have done some horrendous things, it's not my job to judge. And so to recognize that they are away from their families, they are away from their partners, their parents, a lot of them are young, and trying to navigate a very tough situation and recognizing that my job is to show them Christ and show them humanity in a way that they may not have seen from someone, especially in those kinds of facilities, and also help them try to reconnect and understand what their families are going through on the outside. Yeah, it was fun. It was a little different working in corrections, but it's actually something I kind of miss. And it feels always a little awkward to say that because who misses jail? But, it was a little scary at first because the first time you walk in, you hear the doors close behind you, you're like, oh my God, I'm in jail. I've spent my whole life avoiding this and I willingly walked into this. Oh my goodness. And then it was actually really fulfilling.
And I heard you say, to show them Christ. So in that situation, we're we're called to be images all the time. You may be the only Jesus they ever see, and being able to share that with them, which brought to mind, is that something that was like, how much of them counseling in the corrections area, how much of it was about Christ-centeredness? How could you bring that in on a professional level? How did that work for you?
It's always a tricky area. My mom likes to tell people, my daughter's a Christian therapist. I'm like, Mom, don't tell people that, because that's not what, I'm not trained as a Christian therapist. I'm trained as a therapist. And so I like to incorporate faith as a way of coping for a lot of people. It's something that I think grounds most of us. If you're a person of faith, of any faith, it's something that often grounds you. And so in those kinds of facilities, when it feels like there's hell all around you, that's the one thing you can really hold on to. And so helping people to kind of sit with that at the same time of recognizing they've got court tomorrow. Okay, well, what are you praying for? Do you need, and we had people who would pray with you, but it's different when it's a therapist and someone who just kind of will spend time with you, right? A lot of times they wanted you to have quick sessions. I'm like, no, that's not what therapy is, not 20 minutes. I'm not doing that, and so allowing people to be fully human and recognize and still show them love just as one human being can love another. Yeah.
How are some ways that you would break through the barriers? I imagine that there are multiple layers of protection that these individuals have kind of placed around themselves given their circumstances. What kind of things did you incorporate to allow them to, as you said, sit in it? How could you get them to that point?
A lot of our conversations were just getting to know one another. And obviously there are certain things you just don't share in those kinds of spaces. And even ethically as a therapist, I don't share my whole life. But I'm a big fan of self-disclosure. And I think in particular moments, it's really helpful to feel a sense of relationship. I think we are created for relationship. And so where many people pull that back in therapy, I'm a big fan of sitting with that and sharing it. And so not always talking about their case, talking about things that happened on the unit or things that they found out are happening at home, or giving them space. I remember I had one guy who lost his father. He was early 20s. And everybody's like, oh my God, the biggest concern in jail is always suicide. And so their concern was, is he going to kill himself? Like, well, let him sit with the fact that he just lost his dad. And so I had him in my office, but more in the waiting area. And I just let him sit there. And I would bring him, I'm like, do you want any tea or anything? And things that you generally don't do in jail. But you're grieving. And I think in those moments, you just need to know someone cares. And so I think a lot of the interventions are less therapeutic and just a genuine connection.
Yeah, sounds like you show humanity. You allow them to not be a label. They're another person and they have the same feelings as someone who is not in that particular situation.
And there were guys who were a little rough around the edges, I think might be a very peaceful way of saying it. And letting them know, like, you can be rough around the edges within reason, right? There's still a matter of respect and boundaries and still enforcing certain things that they may not have had to ever really deal with and recognize for other people. And, you're not going to come in my office and say certain things or do certain things or be disrespectful. You can go back to your unit. That's perfectly fine with me. And no hard feelings. I'll see you next week. And I think allowing that to just be part of this getting to know each other process, the joining process, allows them to recognize this person actually cares, whether I want her to or not, whether I want to talk to her or not, and that this is a space where they can kind of let the guard down a little bit. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a two-part question because I want it to be one about business, your practice, and then another one personal. When you look back over things, what's some of the biggest challenges you faced, both in your practice and personally?
I would say there's a couple challenges. Professionally, finding my own voice as a therapist. I think there is a assumption that every therapist sounds sweet and nice and how are you feeling today? And that's not how I talk. I'm a very blunt person. I just kind of say things for what they are, while also creating a space for you to feel it and to share it. And so realizing that I don't have to sound like anybody else professionally, that I bring my whole self to this to this space and that that's okay. And I think personally, having my own losses and trying to help other people go through theirs, and it's hard when you and your client are going through the same thing. I'm like, well, I don't know who's the therapist right now. I got nothing. And recognizing that that's okay too, that it's okay just to share a space. And that's really what helps to feel safe and transform. Is just knowing that there's a level of safety between two people, and that it's okay if I'm going through my own thing and may not have the answers. I don't have to have all the answers. It's not really, that's not my purpose, is to tell people what to do or what to feel or make decisions for them. My purpose is to create a safe space for people and to recognize I can do that even when I'm going through my own hell.
Gotcha. Love that.
I think that's really an important part as well, is, people oftentimes see the professional and they fail to see the person and understand that, you may have run out the door with your hair on fire this morning because you woke up late, just like someone else may have. You didn't come to the table with perfection. And I think that knowing that you have those things that aren't quite where you want them to be, I think that's an important thing in the conversation, because then you become more real.
Yeah.
You become more, not necessarily like, but you're no longer different or other.
Right. And I think there's a hierarchy. Like, people assume the therapist, one, has all the answers, or like, I'm gonna tell them what to do, or they can't say certain things, or they can't cuss, or they can't be mad at me, or no, if I piss you off, tell me. Get with me. It's okay. I'm a big girl. I can handle it.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine, because it's about relationship. And if I've said something that is offensive to you, that's not my intent. Right. And so if anything, I'm proud of you, because now we're putting in boundaries. Right. And so now you're letting me know what your boundary is, and I've crossed it, and I've hurt you, and that you are entitled to an apology, and you're standing up for yourself. I love it when people do that with me. I'm like, oh, we're growing. I'll take it, and it's okay. And I actually had a friend, I made a post on Facebook the other day asking, if your partner asked you to go to couples therapy, what would you do? And I had a friend who said, well, I tried that, and the therapist couldn't tell me anything because they couldn't get themselves together, I think is what they said. And I was like, that sounds really uncomfortable, right? Like, they're human too. And if they can't take their personal stuff outside of the session, then I understand that. But it's okay that we're all kind of a mess and running out the house with our hair on fire sometimes. Happens, and I think there has to be room for that.
Right, for sure.
So what are some things, as you've worked with families in the therapy setting, I mean, you worked with all the other environments that you've been in, what do you feel like is the most important thing people need to really foundationally work on and grow?
I think recognizing that relationships are about connection and not your expectations of the other person. People will never do what you want them to do. You can beg, you can plead, you can threaten, you can raise hell, right? You can set the house on fire. They are not going to do what you want them to do. And that's not about that. And most times, honestly, when we feel disconnected, it's because, let me put it this way, most times when we're having fights, right? When the days where I'm irritable and my partner's not doing what I want him to do, and at the basis, I feel disconnected from him. I want his attention. I want him to notice that I'm having a bad day. I want him to talk to me. I want him to be a support. But we take everything so personally. And so it's not that maybe he's going through his own thing and we're missing each other and lacking a connection. It's, he doesn't care. He doesn't love me. It's not that. But we take things so personally. And I think if we recognize that it's about connection, we would kind of maneuver a little bit differently sometimes. Some of the things I've had to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's great. That's good stuff. So when you're talking about the need to establish the relationship foundations and the connections and not having it as expectations, which I completely agree with. I think that's really good words. What kind of therapeutic techniques do you employ to help people create that step-by-step growth process? understanding that it may be 2 steps forward and 4 steps backwards, but you just kind of have to keep pressing forward. What kinds of things do you employ to help them get to a more whole place?
Generally, my first intervention or kind of thing I like to teach people is feelings versus thoughts. If you ask someone, well, how do you feel about, how do you feel about what Chris said? And people will say, well, I feel like that's a thought. I want to know how you feel. Because at the basis, your body is giving you information and your feelings are a source of information for you to figure out how to navigate. And when we say, I feel like, I'm completely ignoring how I feel. I'm not giving an emotion. I'm giving you what I think about what my partner said and how rude it was, rather than saying, I feel hurt. I feel disrespected. I feel offended. I feel appalled that they could say that about me. It's a completely different conversation when we talk about our emotions and our relationships versus just what we think about something. So I generally start with that. And my goal is to always put out the fires first, because everybody comes in, most people come in kind of on fire. And he did this and she did that. And okay, I don't really care, honestly, because at the basis, there's so much more underneath that. I had one couple who they were arguing about the dirt in the sink from watering the plants. And I was like, are we really arguing about dirt in the sink right now? Just saying, I don't care. And they were like, yeah, it's kind of stupid. It's like, yeah, it is. It's completely different. We're talking about something, but not talking about it. And then I like to let people know, kind of educate them on conflict, because that's kind of really what we're dealing with is not fighting fair, the different types of conflict, and understanding that some things are not going to be resolved. They're just not going to, and that it's okay to agree to disagree. And people don't like that. They hate that, but everything doesn't get resolved. And so I try to put out the fires while educating at the same time and giving some tools to kind of build as they go, and then just lots of practice afterwards.
So, mine always goes back to, or my thoughts keep going back to, because I hear you say we're not meant to do life alone. And I know that's for sure a biblical statement, right? The world is about relationships. We're here and created to create relationships. And how your understanding of that, like personal understanding of that, how does that play into the techniques you just described? Like, how do you, I know there's a clinical way of explaining that, but then you also know, okay, well, divinely, this is how we're created. How do you navigate or even use knowing that personally and being able to communicate that to
a lot of times I tell people, I'm like, I honestly believe we're created for relationships. I think it is a foundational piece. If someone sits in isolation too long, you kind of go a little crazy. You go a little stir crazy. You start to crave some type of connection with people, with anybody. It doesn't even matter who it is at a certain point when you're so starved for it. And so to me, that's evidence that we're created for these connections and these relationships. And I think if I say, this is my partner, this is a person God gave me or that God led me to, then I have to honor that, right? I have to recognize that number one, you don't belong to me. You're not my possession. So I can't make demands of you. I can't force you to do things. You are not mine. You are your own person. And my goal is to share life with you in order to have a healthy relationship. And so I think understanding that piece helps people to kind of back off a little bit. And so a lot of times I'll just tell people, this is my personal belief and I'm going to share that. And I'll ask them if they agree or disagree or what they believe about relationships. And some people are like, yeah, no, this is my person. They're mine. I'm like, okay, if you say so, but that's my personal belief. So I try to share that with people.
Gotcha. So, which leads me to another question. In working with couples, the ones that push back, or in families as a whole, or even in corrections, because the assumption wouldn't be that everybody that's in corrections doesn't know what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working with those, the ones that push back versus the ones that share that belief, what are some of the things you've seen that are different, and how those play out, in other words, and how they progress, and how you're able to lead them? Is there a big difference in that?
I think it becomes a hindrance to progression and to growth in a relationship. And so I think when we have a mindset that this person belongs to me, and because you're my husband or my wife, I can tell you what to do, or I can, make demands or whatever. I have some restrictions. I feel like we often stay stuck there. If we're not able to kind of broaden our view and recognize that our partner is their own person, and respect isn't just how someone talks to you. It's not just like, oh, well, he doesn't cuss me out in the morning, he's so respectful. But if you're making demands of me, you're disrespectful. You're not respecting my personhood. And so when we miss that, that's how we kind of get into this ownership of someone or possessiveness, right? You'll see people say, well, I don't want to get married because something changes. And there's something in this dynamic or in that label where people feel that they can possess someone. And so when you make a shift, you can grow, but if you stay there, you stay stuck. And so a lot of times I'll let people know at a certain point, like, okay, we're just circling the drain here. And this is why I think we're circling the drain. You got to either get past it or keep circling,
When you mentioned that they say, I don't want it because something changes, they have this fear. To me, that sounds like a fear, right? So what are some of the biggest fears when it comes to having relationships that you see? And how do you show others how to tackle those fears?
I think people are always afraid that their partner's going to cheat. It's everyone's like number one fear in a relationship. And I get it. It's incredibly hurtful to go through that. I think the more we fear it, the worse the pain is, though. And so I think when we recognize this person isn't staying with me and faithful out of obligation, but because they want to be, because we have both put a lot into this relationship to make it fulfilling and enriching, and it's a healthy investment. And if they cheat, they cheat. Again, I can't tell them what to do. I can't make them do anything. But recognizing that's the fear, and the reality is whatever happens, I have to trust, not that they won't cheat, but I have to trust that I will be able to recover. I have to trust that we can either recover from it, or if I need to leave, then I can. And I can do that as a whole person without losing myself completely. And most people have no concept of that. The fear is that they're cheating. And so we put all of the energy into the fear rather than really the goal. The goal is to be healthy and whole. And so I think it's really about where you put your energy, where you put your time and your focus. People fear that their partner is going to change. Well, of course they're going to change, right? Like neither of you are the same person you were 25 years ago.
Amen.
You know what I mean? And the goal is to grow together, but I got to include you in my life then. I have to share with you in order for us to grow together. And so people are like, oh my God, they're changing. Why aren't you? They're going to change. Either for good or for bad, they're going to change. And so I think when we take away the fear and kind of normalize some of these things, it gets a little easier to manage and to deal with.
Awesome. So, yeah, and what I heard you say was that, what you focus on becomes the problem. I was actually listening to something yesterday, and that's exactly what somebody said. When you're focusing on the problem just grows, rather than focusing on, well, how can I become a better partner, contribute to the world in a different way, and not worry about so much about how the world's treating me, but how am I treating the world? It goes to relationships as well.
Absolutely. And I think, especially for relationships, when we look at our behavior and how we are contributing to the fear and to the shame in the relationship and how it grows. And we don't realize that, right? When you're critical, who wants to be with someone who's critical? You don't. So now your partner's going to walk away. Now you're like, well, why are they walking away from me? Now they're leaving me and I feel lonely. Well, you're critical. I don't want to be around someone who's judgmental and mean and nasty and always got something to say. And so when we can recognize our role in this, then I can say, oh, well, this is why my partner feels the way they do. I'm contributing to this fear and this idea that they're going to leave me by my attitude and my behavior. I'm treating them like I don't want them here. Well, of course they're going to leave then. And so I think when we recognize, yeah, there's a fear, but what am I doing to contribute to that? It goes a long way.
So how do you empower people to find their voice in that and come to terms with their role in the overall? How do you give them the courage, the strength, and the power to take control of their voice in that?
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed I end up doing, especially while they're together, is helping them to create boundaries. A lot of the possessiveness and demands come when there are no boundaries within a couple. And so you have this entitlement to one another and this entitlement to the other person's space and emotions, and that you have there's all access pass to them when you shouldn't. They're still an individual and they still need their time and their space. And I tell people that, and they're like, oh, well, I can have my own space. Yeah, you can have boundaries and space and ways of respecting the relationship and each other individually. Or I'll find a lot of codependency in relationships. And when I point it out, they're like, well, how do I not do that? I'm like, your partner's happiness is not your problem. It's not your responsibility. It's not your burden. And a lot of times I'll say that in front of the partner. And they don't like it, especially if one person is more codependent than the other. They do not like what I say. I'm like, your happiness is your own. The goal is to make myself happy and to share it with my partner. That's it. That's it. And the idea that my partner has to do things to make me happy, they don't like. They don't like that I change that. And so I think implementing boundaries is a huge piece. And redefining what respect is in a relationship is also really necessary. Yeah.
So as we're winding things down, because we want to be super respectful of your time, what is something that we have not asked you about that you think is really important that not only we know, but that our listeners know?
Oh, that's a good one. I think just because you love someone does not mean that they are your forever. And that's a hard pill for most of us to swallow, especially those who have taken the vows and gone down that covenant, but that it's about being healthy and whole. And if you find that you are losing yourself and honestly ignoring your faith and ignoring your relationship with God to prioritize your partner, then something's off. There either needs to be something restructured or, dare I say, a different partner. Because a healthy relationship won't take your focus from God and they won't take your focus from caring for yourself. And I think a lot of times we get lost in that.
And I have two more questions. So one of the things we like to ask people are two things is, like, as a therapist and as a counselor, what you do, what's your superpower in that?
What's my superpower? That's a really good question. I often say that my strength personally is dealing with my emotions and feeling. Even in working in corrections, it's like the place you don't want to feel anything. You don't want to be emotional. And allowing that to be a strength of mine and to help people feel their emotions and sit with them. But I think in terms of a superpower, it's also being a bit confrontational and able to kind of point out places that need some change, point out some areas to focus on, and just kind of bottom line it with people. I don't believe in wasting time or circling the drain, right? And so sometimes it's, let's be emotional, let's be empathetic, let's be honest, and let's be accountable. And so I think kind of tying these all in, almost like you're baking a cake. We need a little of this, we need a little of that in order to make a relationship healthier, and really pointing that out for couples. I'm gonna go with that as a superpower.
Sure. I mean, because I can tell you one of the, in the business space, like one of the hardest things for anyone who has people they're leading to do is to have hard conversations.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't realize that the conflict creates a ton of growth. So being able to get people to have conflict, and that's kind of what I'm hearing, is that you have the ability to, hey, let's stop circling the drain. Let's pound this thing in the head. Let's hit it head on. Let's have a hard conversation, and then let's grow from it, because it does grow. It does grow.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing, we actually have contracts with ourselves that describe who we are, so that we can talk to other people in a very succinct way if we were had to describe ourselves. Does that make sense? Putting you on a big spotlight here, if you had to describe yourself in just a couple of sentences and let somebody know exactly who you were with an I am statement, what would that be?
I am a woman who really values vulnerability and empathy and accountability, both in our relationships and friendships, and personally just to take care of ourselves. And I've recognized if I can't take care of myself, then I can't be a healthy partner. And I want to share that with people.
I love that.
Very good. So how can folks get in touch with you? Where can they find you? What is the best way to be in touch with you if they want to seek your services in some way?
So the best way I would say is through my website, amavetherapy.com. You can also see the other clinicians at the practice. And if you are outside of New Jersey or Pennsylvania, then I'm able to do some coaching. It's slightly different than therapy. It's actually a little bit more intense. And that's part of why I like it. So you can reach me through the website, or you can follow me on Instagram at Janika Veasley, LMFT.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Janika, thank you so much for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know that we've gotten some impact from that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Faith, Family, Fulfillment, brought to you by Chris and Suzanne Vester. We hope you enjoyed listening to this week's guests and stories. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow Chris and Suzanne on Instagram at HVAUTOCOO and Suzanne.c.vester. That's at SUZANNE.c.VESTER.